The bell above the boutique door chimed sweetly as Eleanor stepped inside, her soft footsteps muffled by the plush carpet. The store was elegant, gleaming chandeliers, crisp white walls, and sleek racks of designer clothing that whispered money with every thread. Eleanor's eyes wandered, not in awe, but with gentle curiosity. She wore a faded blue cardigan, a long floral skirt, and shoes that had seen better days. Her hair was neatly tied back, and her face carried the calm of someone who didn't need to prove anything to anyone. But to the saleswoman watching from behind the counter, Eleanor was an eyesore in a world of perfection. "Can I help you?" the woman asked, her tone clipped and her eyes scanning Eleanor like she didn't belong. Eleanor smiled politely. "Just browsing, thank you." She slowly moved between the aisles, fingers lightly brushing the fabric of dresses that cost more than she made in a week, at least, that's what they thought. She paused at a cream-colored gown, simple but elegant, and reached for the tag. "That one's not in your range," the saleswoman said sharply, suddenly beside her. "May I suggest the clearance rack, down the street?" Eleanor blinked, her hand still on the hanger. "I beg your pardon. I'm just saying, we have a certain clientele here, and I think you'd be more comfortable elsewhere." There was no mistaking the condescension in her voice. Another woman, tall, draped in diamonds, and clearly a regular, laughed quietly behind her. The store manager appeared next, drawn by the tension, and instead of easing it, he folded his arms and nodded. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said without sincerity, "but we reserve the right to refuse service." The words hit Eleanor like cold water. She wasn't angry, not yet, but she was stunned. She looked at the saleswoman, then the manager, then the small group of upscale shoppers who now watched her with curious, entertained glances. Without a word, she turned and walked toward the door, her dignity intact, even as her heart pounded. Outside, the sun had dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the street. She stood there for a moment, her hands trembling just slightly, then pulled out her phone. One short message. That was all. She walked down the block, disappearing around the corner, leaving behind whispered insults and smug smiles. Exactly 1 hour later, the street in front of the boutique shimmered with a low, dark rumble. Heads turned. From the end of the block, a sleek, all-black SUV emerged, impossibly polished, windows tinted, engine humming like a beast under control. It pulled up directly in front of the boutique, and the back door swung open. Out stepped a man in a tailored suit that probably cost more than the store's monthly rent. He was tall, his face sharp and unreadable, but his presence made everyone pause. His watch glinted under the soft city lights. His shoes clicked like authority across the pavement. And in his hand? A phone, with Eleanor's message still glowing on the screen. He glanced once through the boutique's glass front. Inside, the saleswoman's smile faltered. The manager's arms slowly uncrossed. The man didn't enter right away. He stood outside for a moment, scanning the boutique as if deciding whether to burn it down with words or silence. Behind him, another SUV arrived. And another. The hum of powerful engines filled the street. People started gathering on the sidewalks, phones raised, murmuring. The boutique, once proud and selective, now looked like a stage before the curtain rose on a very public reckoning. Inside, the saleswoman's face turned pale. She knew. Somehow, she knew. But it was already too late. Because the man outside wasn't just any man. He was Eleanor's husband. And he wasn't here to shop. He was here to settle a score. What happened next, would silence that boutique forever. The air outside the boutique felt heavy, like something big was about to happen. People stopped in their tracks, whispering, some pretending to check their phones while secretly recording. A few bold ones even stepped closer to the line of black SUVs that had now taken over the curb like a security convoy at a presidential visit. Inside the store, the tension had turned physical, shoulders stiffened, jaws tightened, and that earlier smug confidence from the staff? Completely gone. Eleanor wasn't back yet. But her husband was. And his silence was loud. His name was Mason Lane. Not that the boutique staff knew that, yet. He wasn't one of those billionaires who liked attention. No, Mason made his fortune in logistics and infrastructure, quietly dominating industries while staying off gossip blogs and red carpets. He didn't need headlines. He had power in rooms people didn't even know existed. And Eleanor? She'd never cared for any of it. They met long before the billions, back when Mason was just another broke engineer with a rusted-out sedan and a pile of ideas. Eleanor was working 2 jobs and still found time to bring sandwiches to the homeless shelter every Sunday. Mason had noticed her then, not for her looks, though she was beautiful in a way that didn't beg for attention, but for the way she listened, the way she cared. She had a strength that didn't need to be loud. It was calm. Steady. Real. She never bragged about being married to one of the richest men in the country. In fact, most people didn't even know. Not because she hid it, but because she never felt the need to say it. And Mason respected that. He admired her quiet grace far more than any flashy socialite who tried to chase him for the money. But now, someone had crossed a line. Back inside the boutique, the manager tapped the saleswoman's arm nervously. "Are you sure she didn't say anything? Not even a name?" The saleswoman swallowed hard. She looked like someone's maid. "I didn't think. I mean, why would someone like that?" The manager glared. "Stop talking. Just, stop." But it was too late. The door chimed again. Mason stepped inside. No bodyguards. No entourage. Just him. He scanned the room once. The shoppers fell silent. The diamonds, the perfume, the walls of privilege, all of it suddenly seemed cheap in his presence. Not because of how he looked, but because of how he stood. Unshaken. Unbothered. But utterly in control. "Who owns this store?" he asked, his voice smooth but edged. The manager raised his hand halfway, unsure if he should speak. "I see," Mason nodded slowly. "And you're the one who allows your staff to decide who's worthy of being here?" The manager opened his mouth, then closed it again. The saleswoman tried to take a step back, but Mason's eyes caught hers. "You treated a customer poorly today. A woman who came in quietly, respectfully. She didn't ask for anything. She was kind. And you humiliated her." "No, sir," the saleswoman blurted. "It wasn't like that, I didn't know." "That's the point," Mason said sharply, and the entire boutique froze. "You didn't know. You assumed. And that's exactly why I'm here." He pulled out his phone and made one call. No raised voice. No dramatic threat. Just a quiet instruction. Then he turned to the glass windows, where his convoy still waited. Behind him, the manager spoke up, voice trembling. "Sir, if we've made a mistake, we deeply apologize. Please tell us how we can make it right." Mason turned around slowly. Do you know how many boutiques there are in this city? Thousands. And yet, my wife chose yours. Not for herself. She was looking for a dress for someone else, a friend of hers, a teacher who just beat cancer. That's who she is. He paused. And you treated her like trash. The silence was thunderous. Outside, the third SUV door opened. And out stepped Eleanor. She didn't rush. She didn't glare. She walked slowly, with the same calm grace she always carried. And when she entered the boutique, the manager actually took a step back like he'd seen a ghost. The shoppers parted. The saleswoman couldn't speak. Eleanor glanced at her husband, then looked around. Her eyes weren't angry. Just disappointed. And somehow, that was worse. But she didn't say a word. Not yet. Because whatever was about to happen, wasn't finished. Not even close. Eleanor's heels tapped softly against the polished floor as she moved past the racks of overpriced dresses. The boutique was silent, except for the hum of quiet breath and shifting weight, people unsure if they should stay or leave, caught between curiosity and discomfort. Her eyes drifted briefly to the saleswoman, who now stood frozen, color drained from her face, hands nervously clasped in front of her apron. Eleanor stopped beside a velvet mannequin displaying a silver gown she had admired earlier. She reached out, not to touch it, but to glance at the tag again. Same dress. Same store. But suddenly, everyone saw her differently. The only thing that had changed was perception. Mason stood quietly behind her, giving her the space to decide what came next. He had power in every corner of this city. He could buy the building if he wanted. Tear it down. Turn it into a shelter or a free clothing center. But none of that would undo what Eleanor had experienced an hour earlier. This wasn't just about money. It was about dignity. The boutique owner, a woman named Celeste Monroe, arrived 15 minutes later, summoned by Mason's call. She swept in through the boutique doors in a flurry of perfume and panic, her assistant trailing behind her with an iPad and trembling fingers. Celeste was polished, experienced in damage control, and had no idea who Eleanor truly was until she saw her standing beside Mason. Then it hit her, this wasn't just a PR issue. This was a disaster in motion. I am so terribly sorry, Celeste said, eyes darting between the staff and the couple. If I had known. That's the second time someone said that today, Eleanor said softly. If you had known who I was. Celeste stopped short, unsure how to respond. Across the room, a young girl, no more than 19, peeked out from behind a curtain where she had been steaming dresses. Her name was Layla. She was an intern, invisible to most of the staff, but she had seen everything. She'd watched Eleanor get turned away and had wanted to speak up, but fear of losing her unpaid position had kept her quiet. Now, seeing Eleanor stand her ground so calmly, something shifted in Layla. Quietly, she pulled out her phone and sent a text to a blogger friend she trusted, someone who often exposed injustices in the fashion world. She didn't know what would come of it, but the truth needed to breathe. Outside, the crowd was growing. People had started gathering, whispering that something big was happening. A few had recognized Mason Lane. One woman leaned to her friend and whispered, "That's the guy who donated the tech wing to the children's hospital. What's he doing here?" A delivery driver stopped mid-route and took a photo. A local reporter happened to be walking by and raised an eyebrow. "Boutique drama with billionaire firepower," she muttered, pulling out her camera. Back inside, the saleswoman tried to speak again. "I didn't mean anything by it," she said. "It's just, sometimes people come in just to look. They don't really buy anything. And sometimes," Mason said, stepping forward now, "those people have more than enough money to buy the entire block." The weight of his words hit hard. But Eleanor raised her hand gently, stopping him. "It's not about money. It's about kindness. About basic human decency." She looked at the saleswoman, her voice steady. "You made a choice. Not based on who I am, but on who you assumed I wasn't." Celeste flinched, then tried to pivot. "Please. We'd love to offer you any item in the store, free of charge." As a gesture of, "I don't want anything," Eleanor said, cutting her off with quiet resolve. "That's the part you still don't understand." Celeste opened her mouth, then closed it again. As tension thickened in the air, Mason's assistant entered from outside. He leaned into Mason's ear and whispered something low. Mason nodded, eyes flicking toward the door. Whatever had just been said changed something. Because Mason's expression grew even colder. And Eleanor just looked tired. Layla, watching from the side, decided then and there, she wasn't staying silent anymore. She took a deep breath, stepped forward, and said, "I saw everything. She didn't do anything wrong. They were rude the second she walked in. They treated her like she didn't matter." Celeste turned sharply. "You're just an intern." "Exactly," Layla said. "Which means I'm used to being ignored." Her voice echoed in the silence. People outside were still filming. And something was building, bigger than just a bad day in a fancy store. Something no one could stop now. And the truth had only just begun to surface. Outside the boutique, the street buzzed like a live wire. Cars slowed as drivers caught sight of the black SUVs, the growing crowd, and the sharp tension that hung in the air like a storm about to break. The word had spread fast, something major was happening at the boutique on Maple Row. Reporters were arriving. Phones were out. A camera crew from a local news station had set up across the street, aiming a lens through the boutique's glossy windows. Inside, the air felt even heavier. Eleanor stood quietly in the center of it all. She didn't raise her voice, didn't gesture wildly, didn't need to. Her silence was louder than anything that had been said yet. She wasn't just a woman who had been insulted in a high-end shop. She had become a symbol of the quiet way people are judged, dismissed, and forgotten, based only on how they look or what they wear. And now, that quiet judgment was exposed under a very loud spotlight. Celeste, the boutique owner, was sweating under her silk blouse. She could feel the story slipping out of her hands. It was no longer about fixing a mistake, it had become about survival. Her business. Her brand. Her reputation. She shot a look toward the saleswoman, who stood paralyzed, realizing that every second of silence was making things worse. Layla, the intern, stayed by Eleanor's side now, not as a worker, but as a witness. She had already shared the story with her blogger friend, and it had started spreading online. Screenshots of texts, a blurry photo of Eleanor being asked to leave, another of Mason stepping out of the SUV. Comments flooded in. Hashtags had already started trending, hashtag dignity is not luxury and hashtag she deserves respect. Mason checked his phone once and handed it to his assistant, who nodded and stepped outside. Something was moving behind the scenes. Fast. Mason hadn't just come to watch. He was preparing something. Something that would make sure this never happened again. But he hadn't shared it yet, not even with Eleanor. She could see it in his face. That subtle tension. He was holding back, for her. The manager finally tried to take control. "If I may," he said, stepping forward, voice suddenly rehearsed. "We at Monroe Boutique deeply value all our customers and pride ourselves on delivering exceptional service. What happened today does not reflect our values." Eleanor cut in quietly, "Then why did it happen?" He stuttered, searching for a response. "People make mistakes." "Then stop making excuses," Mason said, his voice steady, but low. "Own it. Or this entire brand will be gone by morning." Celeste blanched. "What does that mean?" "It means," Mason said, "my team is already in touch with your landlord. With your suppliers. With your investors. You think this is just a PR issue? This is about integrity. About whether people feel safe walking into your store without being humiliated. You've built your business on exclusivity, fine. But if that exclusivity means excluding basic decency, you're finished." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Celeste looked at Eleanor now with pleading eyes. "Please, we didn't know." "I didn't want you to know who I was," Eleanor said softly. "I wanted you to treat me like a person. That's all." The crowd outside had doubled. A second news crew had arrived. Someone recognized Eleanor from a foundation gala and started explaining the story aloud to the bystanders. "That's Mason Lane's wife. She runs the Youth Education Fund. You remember that viral scholarship story last year? That was her." A few more people gasped. Inside the boutique, the saleswoman finally broke. "I'm sorry," she said, voice cracking. "I really am. I was wrong. I didn't know." Eleanor didn't reply. Not with words. She looked at the woman with a kind of tired understanding, but it wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. Suddenly, Mason's assistant re-entered with a thick folder. He handed it to Mason, who opened it slowly, flipping through documents and photographs. Eleanor looked over, confused. "What is that?" she asked. Mason didn't answer right away. Celeste grew pale as she realized whatever was in that folder wasn't good news. "We found something," Mason finally said, locking eyes with the boutique owner. "Something that goes deeper than one incident." Eleanor turned to him. "What do you mean?" Mason looked down at the papers, then back up at the room. "This wasn't the first time someone was treated like this here," he said. And just like that, the tension rose higher than ever. Because now, it wasn't just about Eleanor. It was about every woman who had walked into that boutique and been turned away, dismissed, or judged in silence. And now? The silence was about to be broken. The room froze at Mason's words. Eleanor stared at him, trying to make sense of what he was implying. The boutique staff, already shaken, now shifted with visible unease. Layla leaned closer, her eyes darting to the folder Mason held in his hand, the weight of the moment settling on everyone like a storm cloud waiting to burst. Mason glanced around the boutique before speaking again, his tone calm but firm. "A few days ago, someone on our philanthropy team noticed a disturbing pattern in reviews and complaints tied to this location. Most of them never made it public. Some were removed. Others, ignored. But we kept records. Women of color. Working-class women. elderly women. All subtly turned away, belittled, made to feel they didn't belong. Celeste's face turned white. Eleanor's stomach sank. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was systemic. It had been happening for a long time, and no one had been paying attention. Or worse, they had, and they'd chosen to look the other way. We traced one review back to a retired schoolteacher who came in to buy a gift for her granddaughter's graduation, Mason continued, flipping to a photo in the folder. She was told everything was too expensive for her and asked to leave. She never told anyone until now. When she saw Eleanor's story starting to spread, she reached out to us. Layla gasped softly. That was Mrs. Greer. She used to come in sometimes. She always looked excited, like just being in the store made her feel special. I didn't know. Celeste moved toward Mason, reaching for the folder. Let me see that. He pulled it back. You'll see it when the public sees it. The tension in the boutique snapped like a tight wire. Celeste turned toward Eleanor, desperate now. We'll fix this. We'll do sensitivity training. Charity partnerships. Rebranding. We can donate to your foundation. Eleanor cut in, her voice clear and sharp. You still think this is about money? Celeste faltered. Before anyone could speak again, a loud voice rang out from the entrance. Excuse me. Everyone turned. A woman in her 60s stood in the doorway. She wore a long navy coat and held a leather handbag close to her side. Her posture was proud, but her voice shook. I saw the news crews outside, and I recognized her, she said, nodding toward Eleanor. I wasn't going to say anything. But now I think maybe I should. Eleanor squinted, trying to place her face. Mason stepped closer to shield her, just in case. But the woman lifted a hand and smiled gently. You won't remember me, but you helped me. At a grocery store, 2 years ago. I didn't have enough money at the register. You stepped in. You didn't make a fuss. You just covered the bill and walked away before I could thank you. Eleanor blinked. I think I do remember. Well, I came here last year, the woman said, walking further inside now, her voice gaining strength. I was going to treat myself to something nice. Just once. But they followed me around like I was stealing. I left in tears. The crowd outside was now pressing against the windows, hearing every word. I wasn't going to speak up. But seeing you here today, I knew it was time. Another voice came from the back of the store. So did I. It was another customer, younger this time, who had been quietly shopping when all of this started. She stepped forward now, phone in hand, tears in her eyes. They told me my body shape wasn't right for their style. That it would be better if I tried the department store across the street. Layla's jaw dropped. She looked at Celeste, who stood speechless in the chaos unraveling in front of her. I think it's time people heard the truth, the young woman said. A producer from the news crew outside pushed through the boutique doors, camera rolling. Do you mind if we film? No one answered. The silence was its own permission. Celeste looked completely lost now, no longer a business owner in charge of anything, just a woman watching her empire crumble under the weight of the truth. Mason handed the folder to the producer without a word. Inside, names. Faces. Receipts. And just when it seemed the moment had reached its peak, Mason's assistant stepped in again, quietly but urgently. Sir, he whispered, holding out his phone. "You're going to want to see this." Mason took the phone. His eyes scanned the screen. Then he looked at Eleanor, his expression unreadable. "They just sent a legal cease and desist from the boutique's parent company," he said. Eleanor stared at him. "They're trying to shut us up?" He nodded. "Looks like they're scared." And in that moment, as reporters turned their cameras toward her, and the internet boiled over with support, outrage, and a demand for answers, Eleanor realized something else. This wasn't just her fight anymore. It had become something much, much bigger. Mason stared at the cease and desist notice on the screen, then looked around at the crowded boutique. The store that once tried to quietly push Eleanor out had become a stage for something far bigger. With every person who spoke up, every voice that joined the room, the story shifted from an isolated incident to a movement. Outside, people were chanting now. A protest had formed without planning, without signs, just raw emotion and support. People weren't just angry about what had happened to Eleanor. They were angry because it had happened to them, or someone they loved. Eleanor stepped forward slowly, her hands slightly trembling, but her voice clear. "They can try to silence me," she said, looking into the cameras, "but they can't silence all of us." A wave of cheers erupted outside. Celeste stood by the register, tears forming in her eyes, but she didn't move. She knew it was over. Her power, her illusion of control. It had all slipped away the moment she decided Eleanor didn't belong. Mason turned to the reporters. "We're filing a formal discrimination complaint with both the Media Ethics Board and the Small Business Accountability Council. We'll be launching an independent investigation, and until this is resolved, we're putting Monroe Boutique's entire brand under review." "What does that mean?" one reporter asked. "It means their corporate funding is frozen. Their PR agency has been dropped. Their suppliers will be notified. And they'll need to explain to their board of investors why their entire public image now hinges on whether they admit the truth, or keep hiding." Celeste gasped, finally stepping forward. "Please. I didn't know it had gone this far." "You didn't want to know," Eleanor said, turning to her. "You just wanted everything to stay beautiful on the surface. But you can't build beauty on top of hurt." The manager tried to interject, "We're willing to cooperate. We can change the staff, the policies." Eleanor shook her head. "The change doesn't start in your policy binder. It starts in your heart. And from what I've seen today, that's still locked shut." The camera lights blinked. Phones recorded. The story was everywhere now. Social media was exploding. Layla's live stream had over 200,000 viewers and growing. People were commenting, sharing, tagging friends. It wasn't just a boutique scandal anymore, it was a cultural moment. And then, just when it seemed like everything had settled into place, something unexpected happened. A tall woman stepped through the crowd and entered the boutique. She wore a beige trench coat and large dark glasses. Her posture was elegant, every step deliberate. Mason looked up, surprised. Eleanor turned and squinted. The woman removed her glasses and gave a small nod. "I'm Evelyn Monroe," she said. "Founder of Monroe Boutique." Gasps filled the room. Even Celeste looked stunned. "I flew in the moment I saw what was happening," Evelyn continued, her voice calm, but sharp. "And I'm here to make something very clear, this store no longer represents my values. Nor my name." Celeste stumbled forward. "Evelyn, I had no idea You stopped listening years ago, Evelyn said, holding up a hand. When you chased profit and status over people. I gave you my trust, and you used it to build walls instead of bridges. She turned to Eleanor now, her expression softening. I'm sorry. From the bottom of my heart. This brand was built to celebrate elegance, not shame it. You were treated horribly, and I will personally make sure it never happens again. Eleanor nodded slowly, unsure of what to say. Evelyn then pulled a folded envelope from her coat and handed it to Mason. I'm dissolving our agreement with this franchise. As of this moment, Celeste no longer operates under the Monroe name. A silence fell, thicker than any before. You can't. Celeste whispered, eyes wide. I just did, Evelyn said, then turned to the reporters. And starting next month, we'll reopen this space as a new initiative, a boutique that showcases designs from marginalized creators. The store will be renamed, and the first featured designer will be someone we overlooked. She turned back to Eleanor. If you're willing, I'd like you to help us lead it. Eleanor blinked, stunned. Mason stepped closer, his hand finding hers. Outside, the crowd erupted again, this time in cheers of hope. The woman who was once kicked out for looking too simple now stood as the future of the very brand that had rejected her. The same boutique that tried to make her feel small was now asking her to help rebuild it, better, fairer, more human. As reporters swarmed, trying to capture every angle of the moment, Eleanor looked out the window at the hundreds of faces staring back. For the first time that day, she smiled. But then, just as things seemed to settle, Mason's assistant returned once more. He handed Mason another phone. This just came in, he whispered. Mason read the screen. His brow furrowed. He looked at Eleanor and whispered, "You're not going to believe who just bought a majority stake in Monroe's parent company." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. Who? He turned the phone toward her. Her eyes widened. Because the name at the top wasn't just familiar, it was personal. It was someone she never thought she'd hear from again. And just like that, the story wasn't over. It was just beginning. Eleanor stared at the phone screen, the name burning into her eyes. Naomi Stratton. Her former college roommate. The one who had disappeared from her life years ago after landing a job in corporate fashion. The same Naomi who once said, "We don't change fashion from the outside. We take a seat at the table and move the chairs." Now she owned the table. Eleanor's lips parted, but no words came. Mason looked equally surprised. Evelyn Monroe was already on a call, confirming the change in ownership. Reporters were whispering frantically among themselves, trying to verify the news. And in that whirlwind of motion, Eleanor felt something settle inside her, like an old door finally closing. Later that night, the crowd had dispersed, and the boutique's lights were off. What had started as a regular afternoon had transformed the entire street. Eleanor sat on a bench nearby, quietly watching as the last news crew packed up. Mason joined her, holding 2 cups of coffee. "You okay?" he asked, handing her one. "I think so," she said, wrapping her fingers around the warm cup. "Still feels unreal." He smiled softly. "You know, I used to think all my wealth meant I could protect the people I care about from the ugliness in the world. Today reminded me that sometimes, it's the people I love who protect me. You didn't just stand up for yourself. You gave everyone else permission to do the same." Eleanor looked over at the boutique. The once pristine window display was gone, replaced by signs announcing a temporary closure. But on the sidewalk in front of it, someone had written in chalk, "Dignity lives here now." It made her eyes sting. A few days passed. Eleanor sat across from Naomi at a small cafe uptown. The reunion was unexpected, but there was no bitterness between them, just quiet understanding. Naomi explained everything. The day she saw the footage of Eleanor being humiliated, something inside her snapped. She had spent years climbing the ladder in silence, biting her tongue, telling herself she'd make changes once she had real power. But seeing Eleanor's grace and strength lit the fire she'd been missing. "I knew it was time," Naomi said. "Time to use my power for something that actually mattered." They talked for hours. About the boutique. About what it could become. About bringing in young designers from communities that never got a fair shot. About turning fashion into a tool for expression, not exclusion. And about what it meant to be heard after years of being overlooked. Soon after, the store reopened under a new name, House of Eleanor. The sign wasn't flashy. Just clean letters against a soft background. Inside, racks were filled with pieces from emerging designers of all backgrounds. Each tag told a story, of heritage, resilience, hope. Customers didn't just shop. They connected. Layla stayed on and was promoted to store director. She ran things with heart, making sure everyone who walked in felt welcome. Celeste stepped away quietly. Rumor was she moved out of state. Mason returned to his foundation work, but he never missed one of Eleanor's opening events. He was there not as a billionaire, but as her husband, proud and quiet. And Eleanor? She bloomed. She held workshops, hosted panels, and mentored young women who never believed they could belong in spaces like this. The boutique became more than a store, it became a symbol. A reminder that beauty doesn't come from the price tag or the label. It comes from dignity, courage, and truth. One afternoon, months later, Eleanor stood inside House of Eleanor as a little girl wandered in with her mother. The girl's eyes lit up when she saw a red dress on a nearby rack. "Can I try that on, Mama?" The mother hesitated, glancing at the tag. Eleanor stepped forward, kneeling beside the girl. "You know what makes that dress really special?" The girl shook her head. "You do," Eleanor said with a smile. "Go try it on. I'll be right here." As the girl skipped toward the fitting room, Eleanor stood and watched them, her heart full. She had been kicked out once for not looking the part. Now she made sure no one ever felt that way again. The world hadn't changed overnight. But it had changed. And for Eleanor, that was enough. Her story, once rooted in pain and rejection, had become one of transformation and triumph. And every time a black SUV rolled up in front of the boutique, it no longer caused whispers or stares. It simply meant someone important had arrived. Someone who mattered. Someone who belonged.